turning around that assignment in the limited time available and turning out a magnificent product. The concern that precipitated the establishment of the Red Ribbon Committee was the perception that perhaps our system of fire and rescue service needed fine-tuning. It's not to indicate that we don't have a good system. We do. And I would guess that if you stop 15 people on the street, citizens, and ask them of their perception related to our fire rescue service, they would say it's very good, it's excellent. And I'm proud of that system. I'm proud of the volunteer system that we have. And the committee obviously agrees with me because they've made recommendations as to how the volunteer system can be improved upon, encouraged, so that we have more people coming into the volunteer system. And hopefully using that volunteer system as a staging ground for career service in both fire and rescue. An internship, if you will. I also was concerned that we have 18 independent companies and that there was not the kind of continuity, accountability, consistency between those 18 companies. There's no problem with the fact that there are 18 service units in Montgomery County, but there must be a closer linkage and consistency and standards between those companies, and that was one of the major assignments to the committee. It was not by accident that I appointed, first requested, and then appointed Judge Cahoon to chair that committee, because we needed a person with the ability to bring diverse views together and to hammer out a consensus, which the judge did and did well. He could not have done it, obviously, without the total cooperation of the commission members. And I want to thank them. I want to congratulate them. They were a committed, dedicated group, gave of themselves many, many hours. But the finished product is something that they can be proud of, something that I can be proud of. And I'm sure that the council will agree that it's a good document to start the consideration and the debate on legislative address of the improving of our fire and rescue service. With those few introductory comments, I'd like to ask the chairperson of the Red Ribbon Committee, Judge David Cahoon, who's no stranger to anyone in this room, to present formally the Commission's report so that the press and the public will be aware of the document that is now available to county government and from which we will now move forward to draft legislation and to implement a program to fine-tune, improve upon the service of the fire and rescue service. And it's indeed a pleasure and an honor for me to introduce David Cahoon, a former judge, chief judge of the 6th Judicial Court, and more recently, chairman of this Red Ribbon Committee. Judge Cahoon.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Let me first publicly express my appreciation to all of the members that worked with me on this committee. And I want to thank you for getting me in the company of such fine people. They were all, with one or two exceptions, strangers to me before this started. I've come to know all of them as being dedicated persons in concern about the overriding public interest in this subject. They have indulged in my whimsies and been most accommodating. They've been We wouldn't have gotten through this if we hadn't had significant, almost total attendance record throughout. This is a time of year which is difficult for many people with family obligations and vacation schedules and hot, humid summers and things of that kind. But they kept at it and made a real contribution to the effort that was underway. I do want to say that I identified as we went along an interesting characteristic of all of them. And while they were on there and identified with certain groups or interests that they eschewed the narrow examination of the issues in terms of their own groups. I've forgotten exactly what the number were, but a substantial majority of them had all, at one time or another in their life, been volunteer firefighters or involved in the volunteer services. And so they had a comprehension about that, as well as any number of them having direct experience in the public service that was involved in this study. One other thing that I made note of to you in the briefing room before we came out here is that the committee all shared this with me, became acutely aware of it myself, that while in the past or oftentimes when there is public debate about these systems and their organizations, there's a lot of dwelling upon the circumstances of the citizens and the taxpayer and the level of service that they're getting and the public safety aspect of it. And that is important. But one of the things that we were dealing with or becoming aware of as a matter of importance is the very lives and safety of the volunteer and career personnel carrying out this service. And that some of the deficiencies that we had noted bore directly upon that. And so I think it's going to be important, Mr. Subin and others, as they go over this, to keep in mind that we're not just dealing with the question of efficient and proficient public service, but the security of the people that are carrying it out. If you don't know much about it, you come to understand that fire suppression, or as the good ex-Marine from Florida called it, the fire combat service. This calls for a team approach by highly motivated people, well-trained and capable of carrying out their functions as a team. So the problems that seem to occur from time to time in the system, in which there are disagreements and antagonisms, are working against that interest. So one of the things that's going to be important is bringing together a cohesive effort. We received our charge from you, and it identified 9 core elements of a program that you advised us that you were committed to. And we weren't expressly asked to comment on your program. We were asked to make recommendations with respect to how you could get it implemented. And I'm not suggesting here that you expected us to be biased and prejudiced, because we weren't. We examined your program, and we looked at it in terms of the presentations that came to us. There's some stats in the report indicating that in the 90 days we met 15 times, and we received all of this material here and attempted to digest it. And then we received presentations from a total of, I believe, 26 people. Now, these included representatives of the volunteers in the service, those who were on the incumbent Fire and Rescue Commission, and the career service personnel, knowledgeable executive and legislative branch personnel, and local, area, and national persons who were experienced in developing volunteer recruitment programs, and individuals responsible for administration of effective transition from exclusively independent volunteer to unified systems. And that's a whole range of backgrounds and experience and comment that we received. They're universally, from those familiar with the system in Montgomery County, they attested to the needs for changes and improvements in the system. And there were a number of deficiencies that were identified, which we found. There's a decline in volunteer service participation, and that is apparently on a persistent trend. There are cumbersome and ineffective administration of the fire suppression function and ancillary personnel management. I think everyone, including members of the commission, attested to the fact that the responsibilities given them in the 1980 legislation to implement a countywide fire and rescue system were too onerous for a part-time commission charged with promulgating policy, administering and implementing the system. And that there were inordinate and long delays in some of the most simple issues, and protracted periods for developing some of the critical and important needs of the system. And I was convinced, and I made reference to it in one of our meetings, that it reminded me of an earlier period when they attempted to do something for higher education in Maryland. And my good friend Governor Broyle made the comment that it was too frail a craft to carry out that mission. And, so the things that were needed and are needed and recognized have got to be addressed with greater dispatch than they have in the past. And we made one or two modest suggestions to your program. We think it's important that you recognize that the is a combined what's needed is to combine a strong career service system with both field delivery and support service by volunteers. And we think that you should recognize where volunteer departments have provided the major funds for equipment, that they ought to have the title to the equipment. You had asked us to respond to make recommendations on the implementation. One of them was the roles of the commission, the corporations, and the county government should play within that structure. What we urge as a first step is the appointment of a volunteer coordinator as a position in the department who's is going to be essential to the carrying out any of the transitions that are needed with respect to the new system and the personnel changes that are contemplated. This person would be reporting to the director of the Department of Fire and Rescue Services and to the commission. Be sort of an ombudsman for the volunteers in the system. Would be bringing to the attention of the director and the commission the concerns of the people in the volunteer service, and would provide an essential ongoing dialogue for you and the people in the executive branch concerning this change. We have recommended that the role of the commission be enhanced by eliminating its responsibilities for administration and implementation and execution of programs, that it should develop long-range proposals designed to address the emerging county operational, facility, and regulatory needs, and that its policy promulgation ought to be subject to ratification by the county executive, and be assigned a recommending role in the budget and 6-year programs. And we believe they should have adequate clerical staff to perform their assigned functions, and that they should have the assistance of technical committees, such as the long-standing Emergency Medical Services Committee that's in existence in helping you. You'd asked for a recommendation on the steps for transition to the county for tax-paid uniform personnel, which is a commitment. We understand there are no legal obstructions to effectuating this transfer, but it's important that it be thoroughly undertaken with consultation among all impacted elements. We've outlined the people that, as a minimum, that ought to be involved with that, and such as representatives of the volunteer services, and the career services, and your executive departments, and the legislative branch. We stress that this transition team ought to be put on a fast track, and that its progress be monitored, and that they should result in the development of a budget for fiscal '89 for the new system, and transfer of the career personnel by the July 1st of next year. We think that because of the unique circumstances of a mixed career and volunteer service and the particular kinds of work schedule requirements, that there should be recognition of a separate unit for collective bargaining or meet and confer units for the county, under the county statutes for the career service. There is a problem that has fiscal overtones with respect to the activities of career people as volunteers in the system. And this has certain fiscal impacts for the county, but it should not be a deterrent, in our view, from undertaking what has to be undertaken here. You are aware that you're already in jeopardy in current litigation on that issue, and just how that will come out, we don't know, but in any event, it shouldn't be an obstacle to proceeding. And we think that what's going to be important and significant here is that there be a clear chain of command in the administration of system, and distinct from that, a integrated chain of command for the fire suppression and rescue operations work. You want to have people in different levels of responsibility that are either career or they may be volunteers, and there's got to be a clear demarcation of who and under what circumstances will be in charge of particular operations. And we see we've suggested an integrated chain of command for your consideration, but it's certainly up your prerogative to establish the one that fits most appropriately. What we want to stress is that it should be integrated, and that it be understood and undertaken and followed by everybody. A third question you presented to us was whether or not those people in the system who are tax-paid and non-uniform personnel, whether they should be county employees. It's uniformed personnel that have petitioned to become county employees. There are approximately 20 people in various positions in the present system that are tax-paid and who are not county employees. We think as a general principle, tax-paid non-uniformed personnel should be county employees, but that there are exceptions to be considered, such as mechanics and the people in the what we call the up-county areas that are performing administrative duties there, and it may not be necessary, important, or expedient to have them enveloped into the county system, and that in those cases there ought to be a grant and aid program worked out to cover the remuneration for those people. You asked us what policies ought to be undertaken to enhance the vitality of a mixed career volunteer system. And the first thing that we recommend on that is achieving standards of training, certification, and recertification for both career and volunteer field delivery personnel. We recommend that you immediately establish a definition of an active volunteer and standards for participation as was recommended in the Ryland report of last year. this, there is great disarray at this point as to what constitutes volunteer, what standards of membership they have to have. In some areas it's just a matter of membership and attending meetings, or perhaps helping out at the dinners, or to those that are serious in carrying out fire suppression efforts and work, and just trying to determine how many are involved in that has been something of a problem. There are criticisms of the current LoSAP program, and it ought to be re-examined. And the objective is that for volunteers in the service ought to be doing the things that they're trained for, and a recognition that they have been trained for it, and an understanding that they have met certain standards. We recommend in connection with this that you establish another transition team called the Volunteer Services Team to examine the certification requirements, benefits, recruitment, retention, training, and implementation schedule, and that team should report to your commission. And there is a problem, particular note in the area of the emergency medical services circumstances, and the need there to improve the conditions for assessment of performance, and to assure the delivery of the same quality of services that are in the those distinct EMS segments, and those that are carrying out rescue operations in other statuses. So one of the things that I mentioned to you in the briefing is that this is a program which wants to encourage and expand the participation of people in the volunteer service. And it's important and significant that be recognized as such. There has been, from our findings, the independent departments have not been universal in any success in stopping the flow of people out of the volunteer service, and it's important that this be stopped, and that we get on with a vigorous recruitment program. It has an importance to us which is not often recognized. From what we heard, where you have a vigorous jurisdiction-wide effort at recruiting volunteers, setting up standards, and getting them active and participating in that way, that it becomes a principal source of recruitment for the career service. And I don't think the county's going to stop growing, so we're going to have to need more and more good first-class career fire and rescue personnel. And this will be a significant pool or circumstance for recruiting. And so it's important to the county that there be a vigorous volunteer recruitment program. And from the recent history in the last decade, it's almost inescapable to conclude that this must become a function of the county government. We do think that it's in this transition period in particular that it's important that you, in addition to hiring the volunteer coordinator, establish a volunteer chiefs council to support the services provided by the volunteers, to coordinate the transition, the development of the chain of command factors, and that sort of thing with the director. This brings those who are responsible at the present time for the response to emergencies and the command of those that they give the director sound advice. The transition steps, essentially, well, we said let's get on with it. It's very hard to set timetables, but we think on the acceptance of this report, you should proceed with the employment of the volunteer coordinator. You should set up these transition and volunteer services teams and give them a timetable for completing what's to be established. Any necessary legislation ought to be submitted to the county council in September of 1987. Your fiscal 89 budget ought to be prepared anticipating the modifications, and the transfer of personnel to the county employment be effected by July 1988. We found during our meetings with some of the other areas, we've gone through these similar processes, that what is important in this kind of a system is that there be a chief or a person at the top tasked to demonstrate a commitment to the success of a mixed system. And this has to be not only by words but by actions and attitudes. And we think it's also important that you impress upon all of the people and departments and agencies under your aegis that you have this commitment, and that a sustained and coordinated and cooperative and innovative effort will be required by them. I think I share the views of, I know I share the views of all the committee on our report, and that they believe that this is an important program that you've undertaken, and that it is necessary in the interests of the personnel involved and the public at large, that it be fully and carefully implemented with as much dispatch as you can bring.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that
You can have this.
digest. Thank you. With this action, the judge has passed on to me the responsibility for implementation. I might note that it's not by coincidence that the county council is represented here this afternoon, because obviously the county executive, as enthused and impressed as I am about the need for moving and moving expeditiously, the county executive cannot implement the necessary changes without the cooperation, consensus, and commitment of the county council. And I will, as I stated to the commission, be sending documentation to the county council of those items that I concur, and an order of priority for implementation of the programs that are suggested by the Red Ribbon Committee. Judge, thank you. Very much appreciate your report, and I again want to repeat my thanks and gratitude to the Red Ribbon Committee. Are there any questions that the press might have? Yes.
What sort of legislation is going to be required by these recommendations?
Well, if you read through the report, you'll find that there's a recommendation made that the career firefighters become county employees. That would take legislative action. It's suggested that they have a separate bargaining unit. That would take council concurrence. It suggested that there be immediately a transition person directed to implement the program. I'd want concurrence on the part of the council. The whole process of implementing a volunteer program would need concurrence by the county council. Certainly all of those items that would require funding would take consensus from the county council. It suggested that there be an established criteria of what equipment would belong to the county government and that equipment that would be assigned to the companies. That would take concurrence on the part of the county council. So each and every one of these actions would take approval by the council.
Would you be prepared to present all that legislation by this September, so maybe the budget?
That's the target that was set by the committee. Now, I'll have to sit down and see if it's realistic. I'd certainly like to be able to see something tangible moving in the direction of the council at the earliest possible date. So certainly that's a target for the county executive.
How do you anticipate selling this? This needs to be sold to the citizens of the county, perhaps those that don't have a background in what's going on in the fire department. What are the values of this kind of program that you can now point to?
I think it's a very saleable commodity to the extent that there is a perception that the process can be improved upon. There is a perception that there should be accountability. There's a perception out there that there isn't the kind of consistent level of service throughout the county, that some departments are better equipped to implement and serve than others, that equipment is more available, manpower is more available in some areas of the county than other parts of the county. Certainly one of the major concerns that I've heard is the consistency of training, volunteer, career, from district to district amongst the 18 various companies. So I think it's a product that's very saleable. Certainly we want community comment. We will have public hearing on each and every one of the suggested legislative proposals, and certainly on the financing of those proposals.
Is there any reassurance, just to follow up, that you might want to give to any of the 18 corporations as to how the power may now not perhaps be lost to them, but in fact their role is maintained?
Part of the committee's report indicates that they suggest that the 18 independent companies be maintained as independent companies, that not be melded or folded, and I see no reason to put that kind of relationship out of business. I think what we need is more consistency between those, more accountability between those 18 companies.
You want to keep the 18 companies, you just want to strengthen it through volunteer services / career personnel.
That's correct, and what has been suggested by the committee is that we have one standard of training, that the career people be county employees, so that there's consistency, that there be consistency in the ability to respond to emergencies throughout the county, so that one area is not better serviced than another area. And I think we can do that by forming a county organized program. I really believe there'll be some efficiencies to that, fiscal efficiencies that will accrue to that central program. I've been concerned that Fairfax County has more paid firefighters than does Montgomery County, and yet their total tab, their bill, is less than ours. So that would at least indicate that perhaps our money is not being spent as efficiently as it should be. There was another question.
Did the committee make any recommendations about changing the budget process? Will the corporation still be able to submit their budget every year, and will they still have an account that they control with county money in it?
I don't think that the committee went into that kind of finite detail. That's something that we will have to, we, the county executive and the county council, and our budget people will have to sit down and digest. An integral part of this whole consideration will be our finance people, the Office of Management and Budget, and certainly the county council, so that we can affect a process that will represent the interests of the 18 independent companies and certainly the interests of our taxpayers.
How much is this going to cost on an average annual basis? We're already spending $44 million a year on fire and rescue services. How much more beyond that is this going to cost?
The system in Fairfax County, where it's been tried and proven, is less expensive than the $40+ million that's being spent in Montgomery County. So I would anticipate that at the very worst, it should not cost us more.
Did you see a memo by your Office of Management and Budget that said that that's not really true because Fairfax doesn't put fringe benefits into their total that they've been giving out, and actually they do spend a little bit more than we do?
I haven't seen anything that indicates that they are spending more than we are.
I think that went to the Red Ribbon Committee, didn't it, Judge Cahoon?
It might have. I have not seen it. But I have every reason to believe that the accountability between companies will lead to efficiencies, fiscal efficiencies. You can readily understand that we couldn't allow our police departments to operate independently throughout the county. We couldn't allow our health units to operate independently throughout the county. Our transportation people couldn't, for obvious reasons. For all of those reasons, it would not be appropriate for the continuation of a fire service that has 18 independent units that are spending money without accountability to a central source. Yes, sir.
You will be seeking to increase the number of volunteers at the same time that you're, in essence, decreasing the responsibility they will have. Do you think that that will present a problem?
Not at all. I think the committee concurs with two facts. Number one, that there is a need to go out and more vigorously stimulate interest in volunteerism, and the committee has indicated in its report that that is not inconsistent with a centralized system of management. So there's nothing inconsistent between the two. Yes.
Let me just make sure I understand. Can you not give us a round figure of how much this whole transition system will cost, or is that included in the 44 plus in the operating budget?
I don't think the committee went into that kind of detail. The committee, as a matter of fact, did not go into expenditures.
So we have no...
The committee has not offered in its report a cost factor.
Now, will any of this affect the 25
Pardon me, do you want to? Sure, please do.
The question isn't whether anything's going to cost any more or not.
Okay.
It's whether you're getting what you're paying for now. And what the committee found was that the present centralized structure in a commission of part-time people is not operating effectively and proficient. And to say that, to give you any projections on dollar figures, when you're going to expand the system, provide for more volunteer participation, and carrying out things at a higher degree of proficiency, and covering more in a growing county, you're just going to be dealing with waves coming in on the beach. That's, you know, I think I'll do deference in. Don't let them hook you up on whether it costs more or doesn't, because it's not. That you can't have any benchmarks to move it from. And like all things, what you're looking for is a presently centralized system. That was decided in 1980. And
it's not operating effectively in these areas that we've identified. So the thing is, let's get the show organized.
Economics, good economics, whether you're running a government or you're running a business, would indicate that with accountability comes efficiency. If you have efficiency, it's fiscal efficiency. And I am convinced from the 17 years of service that I've had in government that when you have accountability, you do save money.
What are some of the changes we can expect to see at the 18 volunteer companies?
Well, I think I listed some of those already. Those were the items that the judge has referenced and the items that I've already referenced. And that is that we'd have greater emphasis on volunteerism, that we would have a central system as far as it relates to equipment, training, personnel. We would have a common program for all of the volunteer system career personnel. That there would be consistency in the number of personnel assigned to each vehicle going out. Right now, there is a difference in the number of personnel on a vehicle that is going out dependent upon the number of people assigned to that particular company. So if I had to pick a single word that would be appropriate, it would be consistency. Yes?
I'm confused. We haven't had a chance to read this, so forgive this if it's a stupid question. I think, have I misunderstood, there was some comment on one hand that the departments should remain independent, and on the other that that can't possibly happen.
No.
I need some clarification about...
What has been said is that the report indicates that there would continue to be 18 corporations, but there would be accountability going from those corporations to the central county government, to the Office of Management and Budget.
So that means there would be like a standardized firefighter training program that would be run by the county, and these 18 volunteer or independent corporations would be feeding firefighters, volunteers?
Would be meeting those standards. They'd be meeting those standards as to how many people are on each vehicle that goes out. They'd be meeting standards as to the equipment that would be available in each company. They would be meeting standards as to how much training time each volunteer spends in the training process, each career person. We'd have the ability to move those career people between companies if we felt that was necessary.
What changes do you see in the role of the chief or director of all this county?
The report, I understand, recommends that there be some central unit to direct all of the services, whether his title or her title would be chief, or whether it be director or whatever. The report does recommend that there be some central person who is responsible for the day-to-day administration.
Are you concerned that that will cause some friction between the county and some of these companies, corporations? Volunteers?
I don't think anyone's in a position to predict what the relationship might be. I think what we have to think of, as the judge stated, is the benefit to the community, not as it relates to the personalities involved. After all, when all's said and done, we're standing here talking about a service to the community. And rather than dwell on the personalities involved, I think it's more important to think in terms of what better benefits the community, the citizens who have the need of the fire and rescue service. That's the bottom line. Yes?
What happens if a corporation doesn't meet the standards or doesn't meet the requirements for accountability?
Then they'll bring it up to standard. If they're not meeting that standard, then they will be required to come up to that standard that's being met by all the other companies.
And if they don't?
I anticipate they all will. I think that
They all depend on the county government for tax money.
So the budget process would come into play then?
I do not anticipate that there will be friction as it relates to the independent companies. I think that they will see the benefit that will accrue to the service, to the citizens, and ultimately to the people who implement the program, the fire and rescue people. And I anticipate that we will be able to sit down, discuss the various views, and reach a consensus. Are there any other questions that you might have? Yes, sir.
At the volunteer houses now, do we see more paid people working, or how will that work?
If they're needed, yes. If it's not needed and the volunteer system is working, that's great, and it'll continue in that fashion. What I'm saying is we're not attempting to substitute career people for volunteer. As a matter of fact, I would like to encourage more volunteers to come into the system. I think it's important to notice that the Red Ribbon Committee suggested that it be a career force supplemented by volunteers. Is there any other comment, question? Yes, sir.
Just ask for the long run, do you think that this, or any of this, is building toward an eventual total county professional fire department without volunteers as the county develops further?
I would hope not. I think that we benefited in the past from the volunteer system, and that's why there is such great emphasis on continuing a volunteer presence in the system. In my judgment, for the foreseeable future, there is a place for volunteers in our system, and this administration will do everything within its power to make the system comfortable for a continued volunteer presence. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your presence. Again, I thank the Red Ribbon Committee. Have a good day.
You are watching County Cable, programming by Montgomery County.
You better.
Hold my breath.
This particular award is the Life Safety Alerting System. And I will say before I start, Fran worked very diligently on this from its very inception, and it was not an easy task for him to get it started for us. The county has some 76,000 elderly, many of whom are living alone. A study showed that 34% of the fire fatalities were people 60 years of age or older. This system provides a device which sounds an alarm in the residence, transmitting coded alarm information via phone lines to the EOC, which then prints the medical and personal information about the people in the household and sends it by radio to the responding fire ambulance personnel. Since March 1985, 82 medical and 55 fire calls have used the system. 14 persons, as a result, have been taken to the hospital. This system provides security to older people, allowing them to remain at home alone, and otherwise they would have to be placed elsewhere. We currently have over 120 subscribers to this system. Congratulations, Frank.
Would Mr. Tetro, the Housing Opportunities Commission, come up?